What if I told you that in ancient Egypt, some women were literally forced to prove their fertility by sleeping with animals, and priests watched to make sure it happened? Yeah. History class forgot to mention that one. Forget pyramids and mummies, because the real nightmares of ancient Egypt weren't just buried in tombs, they were baked into their sex lives. See, when you mix god kings, divine fertility cults, and a ruling class obsessed with bloodlines, you don't just get weird, you get a horror show of incest, rituals, and enough WTF moments to make a modern therapist retire early. And if you think modern dating is complicated, trust me, you'd rather deal with ghosting on Tinder than what the pharaohs were doing in their bedrooms. So grab your papyrus, light a torch, and maybe pour yourself a drink. By the end of this video, you'll either be thankful you weren't born 3,000 years ago, or you'll start questioning if humanity has actually changed at all. Oh, and before we go any further, if you enjoy dark, messed up history that will haunt your brain during random shower thoughts, hit that subscribe button. I need your emotional support to keep researching this disturbing nonsense without going insane. Let's get right into it. Number 1. Divine incest games. Imagine your parents sitting you down and saying, "Sweetie, you're not just marrying your cousin. You're marrying your sibling. Because the gods said so, welcome to royal matchmaking in ancient Egypt." The pharaohs believed themselves to be living gods, descendants of Ra, Osiris, and Isis. And because gods were often married to their siblings in myths, Egyptian royals thought, well, guess we should do the same thing. Keep it in the family, right? So kings routinely married their sisters, daughters, and even granddaughters. That's not a family tree, it's a tangled ball of yarn on fire. And don't think this was just symbolic. These marriages were very real, very sexual, and very necessary if you wanted to keep your claim to the throne. The logic was that sleeping with your sister preserved divine blood. In practice, it just meant the royal gene pool was a shallow puddle full of disease. Scholars have found high rates of genetic defects among royal mummies, clubfoot, cleft palate, scoliosis. Basically, when everyone is your cousin, nature gets revenge. The best part? Egyptian propaganda made this sound romantic. Reliefs show kings and queens gazing lovingly into each other's eyes, except those eyes belonged to their literal sister. That's not romance. That's a Thanksgiving dinner gone way too far. So the next time someone complains about dating apps, remind them, at least you don't have to swipe right on your brother just to keep the family dynasty intact. Number 2. The Festival of Drunken Fertility. Picture this. Thousands of people gathering to get blackout drunk, chant to a fertility goddess, and then engage in what can only be described as a state-sponsored orgy. Welcome to the Festival of Hathor, also known as the Egyptian Coachella, but with way more questionable hookups. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and fertility, was celebrated with a giant annual rager. People would drink beer dyed red to resemble blood, symbolizing when Hathor transformed into a bloodthirsty lioness. After enough booze, the festival quickly turned into public displays of, let's call it, group bonding. Records describe frenzied dancing, nudity, and ritual sex acts meant to guarantee fertility for the year. Priests encouraged it, because the idea was that chaos and lust mirrored the divine union of gods. Ordinary people, farmers, nobles, even royals, joined in. It was the great equalizer, one big sweaty party, where social order dissolved in a haze of alcohol and hormones. Think Burning Man, but with mummies watching. The irony? Egypt also had strict rules about purity, virginity, and controlled sexuality, except when the gods needed a party. Then suddenly, it was like spring break in Cancun, but everyone was dressed in linen skirts and chanting to cow-headed statues. Moral of the story, don't be fooled by those calm stone statues of Egyptian gods. Behind them was a culture that turned worship into one of history's wildest frat parties. Number 3. Animal love affairs. Okay, brace yourself, because while sibling marriage might gross you out, ancient Egypt somehow found a way to top it. Ready? Some fertility rituals involved bestiality. Yeah, I said it. Egyptians worshipped gods with animal heads, like Horus the falcon or Hathor the cow. And sometimes, fertility ceremonies included imitating those gods in ways that crossed a line. There are records and myths suggesting women had ritualized sex acts with animals to embody the goddess. For example, Hathor was linked to cows, and some rites reportedly included women engaging with bulls. Now, historians debate just how widespread this was. It may have been exaggerated by later writers, but even the possibility tells you how intense Egyptian fertility worship got. To them, sex wasn't just human, it was cosmic, divine, and sometimes disturbingly literal. And if that wasn't enough, dead animals were even mummified as sacred lovers or partners of the gods. Archaeologists have found entire tombs full of mummified bulls, cats, and crocodiles. Basically, ancient Egypt was running a whole Noah's Ark of creepy kinks. So yeah, next time someone says they don't make religion like they used to, remember that in ancient Egypt, the church service might have involved a cow. Number 4. The deadly virginity test. Imagine being a teenage girl in ancient Egypt and finding out your wedding night isn't about romance. It's about proof. And by proof, I mean a horrifying virginity test designed to keep everyone's honor intact. Here's how it worked. A bride's purity was often confirmed by displaying blood-stained sheets after consummation. If the sheet stayed clean, big problem. The woman could be accused of lying, cheating, or dishonoring her family, and punishment ranged from humiliation to execution. That's right, a young bride's entire future could depend on the existence of one tiny piece of tissue in her body. And it didn't stop there. Priests sometimes got involved, because of course they did. Records suggest certain temple authorities would verify virginity before marriage. How, you ask? Let's just say it wasn't exactly scientific, and it definitely wasn't consensual. Women's bodies were treated like property contracts. Your worth wasn't about love, personality, or intelligence. It was about blood on a bedsheet. And here's the kicker. Biology doesn't even back this up. Plenty of women don't bleed during their first time, meaning innocent brides were literally gambling with their lives on a medical myth. So yeah, forget romantic candlelit honeymoons. Ancient Egyptian weddings could feel more like a courtroom trial with your uterus as the defendant. Number 5. Priests of pleasure. Ever wondered what your local clergyman would look like if his job was, hands-on? In ancient Egypt, some priests weren't just spiritual leaders. They were ritual sex workers in fancy linen skirts. Sex had divine meaning, and many temples used sacred prostitutes or priests to channel the gods. The idea was that by having intercourse with a priestess or priest, worshippers connected directly with a deity. Fertility blessings, healing, or prophecy were often tied to these encounters. The cult of Isis, for example, carried heavy associations with sexuality. Temples dedicated to her were rumored to host sacred rituals where sex wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. And while much of this comes from later Greek and Roman writers who love to exaggerate, Egyptian sources do confirm that erotic acts were embedded into religious practice. Now, if you're imagining a holy Tinder app, where instead of swiping, you just walk into a temple and find your divine hookup, you're not far off. Ordinary farmers might pay offerings to spend time with a priestess, believing it would make their crops grow better or their wives more fertile. It's both transactional and spiritual. Divine sex as a kind of cosmic customer service. The irony? Many of the same priests preached strict social rules about adultery and purity outside the temple. Basically, do as we say, not as we do. Unless you pay first. Number 6. The Pharaoh's sacred hand. Okay, here comes the weirdest one yet. In some Egyptian myths, the act of masturbation wasn't shameful at all. It was holy. In fact, one creation myth says the god Adam brought the world into existence by pleasuring himself and spilling his seed across the primordial waters. Yes, the Big Bang, but make it awkward. Because of this, pharaohs were sometimes expected to reenact this divine act as a fertility ritual. Picture it. The most powerful man in the kingdom standing on the banks of the Nile, in full regalia, publicly, seeding the waters to ensure the river would flood and crops would grow. Talk about a performance review from hell. And this wasn't just mythological theory. There are temple carvings and texts that reference ritual masturbation as part of sacred rites. The Nile was literally seen as a life-giving womb, and the pharaoh's body was the cosmic fertilizer. Now, we don't know how often this ritual was actually carried out, or if it was more symbolic, but the fact that it was even considered sacred shows how differently Egyptians viewed sexuality. To them, creation and fertility weren't dirty topics. They were the literal foundations of civilization. Still, you have to wonder how the royal advisors pitched this idea. Your Majesty, the kingdom is starving. Time to, take matters into your own hands. Number 7. Tomb erotica. You probably think of Egyptian tombs as solemn, sacred places filled with gold, mummies, and curses. But did you know some tomb walls were basically ancient porn magazines? Yeah. Turns out, the afterlife came with a side of erotica. Archaeologists have uncovered papyri and carvings that depict erotic scenes so vivid they'd make modern censors blush. The most infamous is the Turin Erotic Papyrus, often dubbed the world's oldest dirty comic strip. It shows priests, musicians, and women in exaggerated sexual positions, many involving multiple partners and some acrobatics that would send a yoga instructor straight to the chiropractor. Why? Because Egyptians believed pleasure didn't stop after death. Tomb owners stocked their eternal bedrooms with images of sex to ensure they'd have a good time in the afterlife. Just like you'd want a Spotify playlist for a road trip, they wanted a cosmic playlist of eternal hookups. Some scholars argue these drawings were satirical, poking fun at corrupt priests or social elites. Others think they were genuine ritual guides for pleasure in the next world. Either way, they proved that the Egyptians didn't separate sex from spirituality. To them, the afterlife wasn't just paradise, it was basically the ultimate never-ending honeymoon suite. So yeah, while modern gravestones say rest in peace, ancient Egyptian tomb art pretty much said rest in pieces, preferably with company. Number 8. Magic, potions, and love spells. If you thought Egyptian romance was all about eyeliner and dramatic boat rides on the Nile, think again. Ancient lovers weren't afraid to dabble in some good old-fashioned magic, and the spells they cooked up were equal parts creepy and kinky. Love spells were wildly popular in Egypt, and many involved sex. Some papyri describe rituals where a man would mix his semen with herbs and recite incantations to bind a lover to him forever. Others called for women to use menstrual blood or pubic hair in potions, meant to control desire or guarantee fidelity. Imagine slipping that into someone's drink at a dinner party. Instant curse. And it wasn't all about romance. There were spells for virility, fertility, and even hexes to ruin an enemy's sex life. A common curse tablet might wish for a rival's member to shrivel and become useless forever. Basically, erectile dysfunction by black magic. But the darker side of this? Consent was optional. Many love spells were aimed at forcing someone to fall in lust, whether they wanted to or not. Magic was seen as a way to override free will, turning desire into a kind of supernatural hostage situation. So next time someone talks about manifesting their soulmate, remember, in ancient Egypt, that might have meant sacrificing a goat and whispering erotic poetry into a jar of blood. Number 9. Sacred prostitution in the Temple of Mut. If you were a woman born into service at certain Egyptian temples, your job description wasn't just sing hymns or burn incense. Nope. For priestesses of the goddess Mut, Your role may have included ritual sex with worshippers as a way to embody divine femininity. The cult of Mut, linked to motherhood, power, and fertility, was infamous for rituals where women became living avatars of the goddess. Men who slept with them believed they were uniting with Mut herself, absorbing divine blessings in exchange for offerings. Some sources even suggest that temple prostitution wasn't considered shameful. It was seen as one of the highest forms of devotion. Think about how upside down that is compared to today. In Egyptian culture, a temple prostitute wasn't scorned. She was honored, celebrated, and believed to be a literal stand-in for the goddess. Talk about career prestige. Of course, this came with exploitation too. Many of these women didn't have a choice. They were given to the temple young, their lives dedicated to serving in ways they might not have wanted. It's the same old story. Religion dressed up as honor, but often hiding a system of control. So while Egyptian men walked out of the temple thinking they just had a holy hookup, the women inside might have been silently wondering if eternity was long enough to get out of their contracts. Number 10. The Pharaohs' Harem of Horror. Forget the Disney version of a harem with silk curtains and lounging beauties. In ancient Egypt, the royal harem was less a luxury and more gilded prison. Pharaohs kept enormous harems filled with wives, concubines, and slaves, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. These women were chosen not just for beauty, but for political reasons. Marry a princess from another kingdom? Boom! Instant peace treaty. Add her to the harem. Capture enemies in war? Congratulations. The loser's daughters are now part of your royal sex inventory. Life inside the harem wasn't all perfume and jewels. It was a brutal competition. Every woman wanted her son to be the next pharaoh, because that meant ultimate power. Backstabbing, poisoning, and plotting were common. Entire dynasties were shaped, or destroyed, by the drama inside those palace walls. One of the most infamous cases was the harem conspiracy against Ramses III. His wives and servants literally tried to assassinate him so one of their sons could take the throne. The result? A bloody purge that left dozens tortured and executed. Imagine Real Housewives of the Nile, but with daggers and crocodiles instead of wine glasses. And don't forget, most of these women had no choice in being there. For many, the harem wasn't a palace, it was a cage. Their bodies, their futures, and even their children were all pawns in a dangerous game of power. So yeah, while Hollywood loves to glamorize harems, the reality was more like a mix of Survivor, Game of Thrones, and a really bad prison documentary. Number 11. Necrophilia in the mortuary. Okay, this one might be the darkest of all. You know those lavish mummification rituals Egyptians are famous for? Well, they had a disturbing side effect: necrophilia. Here's the problem. Egyptian women, especially noble women, were highly sexualized in life and even in death. Fresh corpses of beautiful women were sometimes taken advantage of by embalmers before being fully prepared for burial. Yes, that means what you think it means. This was such a known issue that families sometimes delayed sending the body to the embalmers until it had already started decomposing, just to make it less desirable. Imagine grieving your daughter or wife and having to worry about mortuary workers violating her body. That's the level of horror we're talking about. Ancient texts even mention laws and warnings against the practice, which pretty much confirms it was happening often enough to need rules. And because priests handled mummification, the very people trusted to ensure safe passage into the afterlife were sometimes the ones committing the most grotesque crimes. It's hard to overstate how shocking this is, even in a world full of incest, bestiality, and ritual sex. Necrophilia wasn't just a taboo, it was a violation that stripped women of dignity in both life and death. So yeah, next time you see a perfectly wrapped mummy in a museum, remember, the wrapping might have been less about preservation and more about protection. Number 12. The fertility of the Nile. Last but not least, let's circle back to Egypt's obsession with the Nile, because it wasn't just a river, It was basically the kingdom's gigantic, sexy lifeline. The Nile's flooding patterns determined whether Egypt thrived or starved, so naturally, fertility rituals centered on the sacred river. Offerings included everything from crops and gold to, erotic rites. Couples would perform public sex acts on the banks to encourage the river to flood. Think of it like farmers doing interpretive dance, except naked, sweaty, and hoping the gods were watching. Some texts even suggest that virgins, or in darker versions, unwilling victims, were sacrificed to the river, their blood mixing with the waters as a gift to the gods. While not as well documented as other rituals, the symbolism makes sense. Give life to the river so it gives life back to the people. To the Egyptians, the Nile was a womb, a lover, and a god all rolled into one. And they weren't shy about showing their devotion in ways that would make modern environmental activists faint. So the next time you picture serene Egyptian riverboats gliding under the sunset, remember that just downriver, someone might have been performing a very different kind of ritual for the harvest. And that, my brave little desert explorers, is the horrifying sexual underbelly of ancient Egypt. From incestuous dynasties to drunken fertility festivals, from necrophilia in tombs to bulls in the bedroom, this culture pushed human sexuality to some of its darkest, strangest extremes. If history teaches us anything, it's this: power makes people do really gross things. And when you mix religion with politics and a dash of God complex, humanity gets real weird real fast. So maybe next time you complain about modern dating apps, take comfort. At least your love life doesn't involve ritual cows, mummy priests, or a royal sibling waiting in your bed. Or maybe it does. I don't know your life. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.